All right, I'm back with part 2 of week 6 videos with more examples of my experimental poems. And I'll just try to run through just a bunch of examples. And let's see, here's one where I am utilizing a lot of white space. And again, I can show this to you in class, but I wanted to have space between phrases. And it reads like this. Torrey Pines. At 40, I climbed Torrey Pines a second time. I thought my knees would go bad before I could return. I was wrong. My knees are okay, but I haven't returned to California. A gold and green pin reading Torrey Pines sits in a plastic box in my room, along with a box of my children's teeth. Children will feed from your flesh long after their new teeth come in. California burns. So you can see that there are separate stanzas. There's 5 separate stanzas, but they're less distinguished from one another because of the white space within the stanzas. And so it's just kind of freeing. I really suggest trying adding spaces between your phrasing. It might also help you with line in general because it just kind of gives that breathing room around the different elements. Here is a poem that I wrote as a worksheet, and I call it Busy Worksheet. And I thought it would be a way to convey, you know, to convey a certain concept. This is like kind of memories from my childhood, and also to just show the idea of how a lot of what kids are given to do in school is just busy work or kind of meaningless. And then I just have, let's see, when you arrive, let's see, you pack your blank in your sports sack and ride your bike to the far park. All the time and space alone these years is blank, though it feels infinite. So I'm creating that space, and then I have the word bank, and each one is meant to fit into a certain spot. And then at the end I have short answer. It says, how will you be a better person for the rest of your life after all this? So that's meant to be kind of an unanswerable question. Here is a poem, an experimental or concrete kind of form on the topic of fossils. In the class, Frisia, I'll share, I think she has a workshop coming up this spring. So she was talking about fossils. And of course, that's a great starting point for metaphor. And so I wrote a poem called Fossil of Pollen. And this kind of punctuation is meant to be like a flower. And then there's like a period next to each word, and it's meant to be read this way and to look like drifting pollen. But if you read it going this way, it reads, fossils of pollen cannot reproduce. Life cannot produce a histamine response. They are silenced like the rest of us, our history like mineral memory. I really, really enjoyed doing experimental poems like this. It's so freeing to just take away all those boundaries that we have for ourselves on the page and just literally write it going up. And, you know, if it turns out that, you know, maybe this isn't so readable, maybe it's impractical or whatever, that doesn't, like, the product doesn't matter, it's the process. Here is an exercise in erasure, which actually in its final form, I'll show you how to like white out all these words. You can just white them out instead of blacking them out and just having like open space. And so I have one stanza, or it's kind of a narrative. In the beginning, I tried to count out 10 pita chips from the bag to add up to 100 calories. In my little bowl, I turn and turn the bag. They're mostly broken pieces, like fragments, like tiles. And I think already this will be a poem. I read last night about how my adrenal glands and my butterfly-shaped thyroid, the thermostat in my neck, can be all out of whack because of earlier trauma. Still, I count calories and record them in an app. I took this stanza and I just copied and pasted it, repeated it all of these times. These are the same stanza. And then I blacked out most of it so that what is left is, I turn and turn, pieces like fragments out of whack. My little bowl, the thermostat in my neck, butterfly-shaped trauma. Broken, still I count, I try. So all of those phrases are from this original stanza. You could arguably just take out that whole first stanza and maybe just take away where it's blacked out and just have those words as a brief poem. Let's look for another couple more examples. And okay, so here, this is an abecedarian, and it's also a concrete poem, which was so much simpler in its execution than what it might seem. It might look like a lot of work, and normally I think an abecedarian would be a lot of work, but when I explain how I did this, you'll see that it's a pretty simple concept. So these names, these are the names of all the hurricanes that we had for this past season. So that's just pulled from online. It's just found poetry, the names of all of the hurricanes, A down to W at the time that I wrote this. And then the title is, I have several titles. I have Abecedarian for Greta Thunberg, or Climate Change Class List, or Say My Name Hurricane, or Climate Change blah, blah, blah. So in a speech, she called out world leaders for their inaction and how they're just always talking but never doing anything. And so she said blah, blah, blah. And so I have all the names. And then from here, after Wanda, it just goes blah, 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 blah. So I recommend watching or listening to or reading the news and finding little tidbits of something that you could pull into a poem. So just blah, blah, blah became a poem. And as I said, like it's so much simpler. I didn't have to do all the work of coming up with those names. And let me see if there's any other ones. Okay, here is, this is my resume. So that's a found poem. And then, or, a found form. It's just a resume that anyone would have. And then I took the word mothering and I put it all throughout my resume. So it's just fragmenting it. So it's making a statement about how being a parent is so disruptive to professional accomplishments. And yeah, so you can read everything, but there's also the word mothering inserted. And it was kind of funny because I also did this for my bio. So like it's like in a narrative form, like a paragraph. And I inserted mothering all over the place. And I submitted a poem that was an experimental poem, and it was to a magazine that was like experimental, or a journal. And they accepted my poem, and then they emailed me saying, oh, there's something glitchy with your bio. Can you resend it? And so I didn't try to explain that it was meant to be a poem. I just resent them the standard version of it. Okay, let's see. This is one that came out kind of more visual than anything else, but it's an article about the tradition of fragment. And then I just put a line through a lot of the lines, and then I just shredded it. And then I just glued it up. And if you use rubber cement, then it's really easy to wipe away the excess. And so that's just kind of playing with more visual art. The content, I can't say that I necessarily think that the meaning came across really great in this poem, but I would definitely try this kind of shredded approach again with something else. Likewise, I wanted to write something about the forest fires, and I just wrote sequoias blaze, sequoias blaze. And I had heard in a news report, as a result of human choices and human activity. And those are meant to look like trees. And I don't know that it's really executed like how I was hoping, but it's just the process. And that's about it. So those are just some experimental poems. You could, it just gives you a sense of what the possibilities are. You could try emulating any of those, or maybe just find a starting point from any of those, or like I mentioned, finding a starting point from one in our book. We'll look at some more great examples this week. Thank you.